New from Radiotopia presents Red for Revolution, an audio drama about Black love, queer romance, and liberation. Join Jasmine, an 18-year-old navigating her queer identity while learning about her grandmother's secret love affair. Through her discoveries, we're transported back to 1971 to witness two remarkable women embark on a romance that defies all conventions. Subscribe to Radiotopia Presents and listen to Red for Revolution wherever you get your podcasts.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Months ago, I was in the lobby of the Broad Institute in Cambridge. That's where scientists affiliated with both Harvard and MIT do research, make discoveries, and think about the future of our health. Our podcast producer, Christine, and I were there to talk to a brain expert for this season. Our interview with said brain expert was very insightful, and we will get to that. But as we waited in the lobby to talk to this expert, something very Boston happened.
You're from Love Letters, aren't you? Yeah. Do you recognize me?
A little bit.
Yeah. Allison Lee, my husband and I dated.
Oh my God. This woman approached me in the lobby. Her name is Allison. She's a scientist who does drug discovery for CDOT, which is the Center for the Development of Therapeutics at the Broad. I haven't seen her in a decade, probably. The reason I know her is that she's one of a few couples who met in the comments section of the Love Letters column. She used to comment on the column under a literary-inspired name, from my memory, and then she notices this guy who's also commenting with really thoughtful stuff. The two become friendly, commenting at and around each other, and then they meet at a Love Letters event in person. They had a lot in common, and after that meeting, they fell in love, got married, and had kids because of Love Letters. They did not name any of their children Meredith, but that's fine.
A couple days ago, so I was thinking of, I was putting together a little photo album. It was like a gift of all 10 years, and I was thinking, because I put the first picture in, I put the Boston Globe picture in, because I'm like, okay, this is how we met. And now we have 2 kids. My son's almost 9, and my daughter will be 5 or 6. Wow. She's 5 now. It's crazy, right? It's a success story, but through the comment section. Right. Who meets in the comment section?
For the record, if you start commenting on the Love Letters column, I cannot promise you'll find a spouse. This was many years ago and under unique circumstances. But still, it's a reminder that love can show up in the most unlikely places. From the Boston Globe, this is Love Letters. I'm Meredith Goldstein. So the day I ran into Allison, I was at the Broad Institute because my producer and I had been grappling with the question of our season. Can people change? I've been thinking about how we define change, the concept of becoming different than we are. It can show up in all sorts of ways. Maybe we want to change our own way of thinking, like perhaps we want to be a happier person while being single. Or maybe we want someone else to change. Like we hope a partner will deal with conflict better. And maybe sometimes we just want things around us to change. My assumption is that our brains are in charge of change. It is literally the thing that controls what we're thinking and doing. And because I don't know much about the brain at all, I decided we need to talk to someone who does. So I called the Broad Institute to see if there was an expert who could talk to us. The administrators there said I should come and talk to Dr. Stephen Hyman. They said he was the brain boss. So on a random day, our producer Christine and I went to find him.
Okay. So why are we here today?
We are here because I don't actually know about the brain. Well, I don't know about a lot of things, but when we talk about the question of change, like, can relationships change? Can people change? There's actually like a scientific answer to that probably that goes beyond the philosophical, can we be better people and be better spouses or people dating? And before we get into all the real nitty gritty of, you know, people proving that with their stories, I actually am curious to rewind a little bit and just figure out what our brains are capable of, because I don't know anything about my own mind.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah, right. We enter the building and wait in the lobby for Dr. Hyman. Let me give you some of his resume so you can be impressed. He's the director of the Broads program in brain health, a Harvard University Distinguished Service Professor. He was a Harvard provost for a decade or so, and he even served as director of the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health. There's more, but I think that's enough. He is smart with a capital S, you get it. When we get to his office, there's this big sprawling equation written on a whiteboard, like in Good Will Hunting.
This makes sense to you?
Yeah.
I like equations.
We write on, and this is a place where we write on the walls, and we feel good.
This is what it means to be a real scientist, I assume. Equations on whiteboards. But do you feel like you're like, oh, that's an equation, I totally get what that means?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of fonts here.
Okay, like that to me is like what I would write as a fake equation.
No, but that one's not fake.
Okay.
Yeah.
Equation aside, we sit down and finally ask Dr. Hyman the big question. Can people change? His answer is complicated, and it starts all the way back with fertilization.
This is going to be a little bit of a story, right? Because it depends on when in your life and under what circumstances and how powerful the stimuli are. You're at fertilization, you get, two copies of the human genome with its own flavors. And it's very influential. It is not by itself fate. I mean, that's really very important. Genes are highly, highly influential, but they are read out in the context of your development in early childhood, and you're building your child brain, right?
He explains that the changes we experience as we become a person are based mainly on synapses, connecting wires, if you will. According to Dr. Hyman, you have the largest number at about 10 or 11 years old, but then your personal lived experience begins to whittle away at those synapses. Basically, if you don't use it, you lose it.
To use the words of a famous neurophysiologist, Donald Hebb, neurons that fire together wire together.
And then, as you continue to grow, your brain begins to settle into its early adult form.
Beginning in, late childhood, early adolescence, you begin to reorganize your brain into an adult brain. This is a big change, right? In this reorganization, weak, unused synapses are removed. They're eliminated. This process goes on probably into your 20s, and then there are enormous changes between a child and an adult. Now, you can see, of course, the self-actualization of this little person throughout life. You give up your imaginary friends, and you develop adult cognitive control, the ability to control your behavior and moral emotion. That's, by the way, why we have, just empirically, that's why there's adult justice systems and juvenile justice systems. What's important is, while these gates of plasticity are open, right, while you are becoming an adult, while you're reorganizing your synapses, and therefore your thought, your emotion, your behavioral control, that's also a time of maximum risk for mental illness.
The Gates of Plasticity. I want to give a small trigger warning here and say that Dr. Hyman and I are now going to get into information about mental illness, anorexia, and eventually addiction. If you need to bow out, I'll give you a beat. Dr. Hyman says that most mental illnesses generally show up before or around the age of 18 or 20. These are genetically influenced disorders that emerge when we are in a major brain change from childhood to adulthood. Stephen Hyman explains that the journey into our more final adult state is a complicated time because things can go wrong. Our brains are not as malleable as they were in our adolescence, but they also aren't yet done changing.
This time of plasticity is a great time also on the positive side of learning, right? This is when you go in high school, you go out to college, you go out to graduate school, and developmental achievements, right? Potentially finding a life partner, maybe forming a family, getting a first job after college. But there's two sides to this, right? One is this great opportunity for development, self-actualization, change in the context of your genes and the environment that you're in, right? But also then the risk of mental illness, something going wrong during this period.
And then after that, as we head into our mid-20s, things start to settle. Our ability to change becomes less in many ways.
Once you're in your late 20s, early 30s, after synaptic reorganization and myelination, people tend to change, well, maybe in details, but not so much wholesale. And it just gets a lot harder.
Dr. Hyman is saying we have these natural moments of change in our lives as we grow up. Then we're in our 30s, and at some point we become like wet concrete that has dried. That's my metaphor, not his. He points out that we're also not necessarily in control of what changes happen, which we have to accept.
It seems like you're also talking about like what I'm thinking of is like little change, big change. I'm leaning more left.
I'm leaning more left, and I've given up.
I exercise more.
Yeah, I exercise more. I've tried to give up ice cream. I failed. Yeah.
But the big changes, I don't know if it makes me feel better or worse to know we're not in control of it, because I think there's this, and there's a message we get of like, you can change and
yes,
you can be better or different.
I tell Stephen Hyman about Fumi from the first episode of the season. If you haven't listened to our first two stories, go back and do it for context. We'll talk about both of them today. In episode 1, Fumi told us that after she went through a trauma related to her mother's health, she developed this always present anxiety. She turned into someone who was always waiting for something terrible to happen, even after months of her mom being better. It was like her brain had been programmed during those many months of her mom's illness to be on call and on guard. She was constantly in fight or flight mode, a very difficult place to be. Then, in her mid to late 20s, she took a clown class and got good therapy and really practiced living more in the present and less in a state of worry. And she says she changed. I tell all of this to Stephen Hyman and ask, did she really change on a fundamental level? And he says it's possible she did get rewired because she was young.
She was in this period of plasticity if she was in her 20s still. I mean, different than if this happened when she was in her 50s.
I mean, that's interesting because I thought, she's young to, so many people are caring for a parent later on. She took a clown class and physical comedy, right?
Yes.
And so in those moments, her brain had to truly be in that moment of falling down, making it like she couldn't. And it felt like she had, in opting into an activity, she was teaching herself to be present, to rewire again. Do you think that was easier for her based on age, or that actually doing something wildly different?
It's age and salience.
Okay. He says not only was her rewiring possible because of her age, but also because of salience. He'll explain when we return.
Here at Life Kit, NPR's self-help podcast, we love the idea of helping you make meaningful lifestyle changes. Our policy, don't be too punishing on yourself or too grand in your goals, which is why we've got shows on how to help you make little nudges to your behavior and create habits that stick. Join Life Kit to get the tools you need. Listen to the Life Kit podcast from NPR.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
Welcome to the White Lotus in Thailand. It's a wellness center. You should get a facial. The lady in the airport thought you were my dad.
Oh my God.
The Emmy Award-winning HBO original series returns.
There has been more crime on the island.
I'm a little freaked out.
What happens in Thailand stays in Thailand.
Oh, what does that mean?
It means we're not dead yet.
Amen. Amen.
A new season of the HBO original series The White Lotus premieres February 16th at 9 p.m. on Max.
Okay, back to my conversation with Broad Institute brain scientist Stephen Hyman. Before the break, he was telling me about salience. Stephen Hyman says salience is new information that matters. That's the easiest way I can say it. This can be good information or warning information. Like a positive example might be, I tried something new. I liked it. It made me feel healthy. I'll do that now.
I mean, the more one is in, again, periods, adolescence, early adulthood is a time when the gates of plasticity are open. And if you're in a compelling, salient environment, or you have certain mentors or certain peers, you can be influenced, right?
So at 47, I could maybe take a clown class and have some effects, but it would be harder for me.
It would be harder.
This makes me think of our second episode of the season, which was about Kelly, the woman who moved from Australia to Italy with her ex-husband. Kelly herself didn't actually change that much, though not for lack of trying. But she did experience this salience thing. She altered her whole environment. By moving to a place where she felt more at home and comfortable, she was able to finally feel happy. Stephen Hyman wanted me to understand that salience and age aside, a lot of change is not up to us. He says that for too long, society has sold us the lie that we can make improvements to things that we actually can't. Things that are actually very hard to change. He brings up GLP-1 drugs as evidence of this. An example of a GLP-1 drug is Ozempic, which you've probably heard of. It helps with diabetes and truly changes the chemistry of how people eat and how their bodies work, from what I've seen. Dr. Hyman says, let's let Ozempic teach us something about what's on us and what requires help.
We have long overvalued willpower. Willpower doesn't get us very far, right? People who diet or, tend to almost universally to regain the weight. People who are addicted can eventually be treated, but there are often many, many relapses. Somebody who's giving up smoking will try all kinds of different nostrums and so forth. And then we have these GLP-1 drugs, the Ozempics, the, Wegovy. And all of a sudden people can lose weight because let's say, imagine the set point of energy balance in the part of the brain that controls us in the hypothalamus has changed. And then you have doctors saying with incredulity, oh my God, it was biological after all. And I want to say, well, what did you think?
I want to admit here that I thought Dr. Hyman would be a scientist who would tell me that our brains are a canvas and that if we exercise them, our powers are limitless. That if we want to be people who are open-minded or less intense or less needy or less worried, we can. But what he's actually kind of saying is that after a certain age, specifically early 30s, we get set in our ways. And some problems we can't do anything superstructural without help in the form of a drug that resets us. Hearing this might seem like a big bummer for a post-30-something like me. Maybe better for all you listeners who are still in your plastic years, I'll call them. But rather than think of this as a bad thing, I know that Dr. Hyman's thoughts on all of this are actually encouraging. They make me a little kinder to myself. He says we're all so hard on ourselves about our inability to change our habits or ways of thinking that don't serve us well. And what he's saying is we're not failing because it might not be a battle we can win. It would take more help. And in his opinion, we have barely scratched the surface on medication that can be helpful when it comes to mental illness. A lot of people get some relief from antidepressants, he says, but a lot of these drugs aren't there yet. That's his professional opinion. Like, he's saying we haven't found an Ozempic for anxiety, let's say. This is when he and I start talking about how medicine can rewire us and how sometimes that's just what we need to make change. I tell him about a time that I maybe used brain medicine inappropriately. It's relevant because, well, I wanted to figure out what happened to me that day. I will admit this to you now. Years ago, I had an end of a book due, and for the first time in my life, I took someone else's medication. And then I was like, oh my God, this is what people were doing when I was in college. People were taking each other's Adderall, and it's amazing. Yeah. So confessing to you here, I took the Adderall.
Highly
the best day of my life.
Yeah.
I was scrolling and there was a picture on Instagram and I was like, oh my God, that picture of me is amazing. And I looked closer and it was a picture of Reese Witherspoon. I was out of my mind.
Well, so you had a little too much, but then what
or just enough.
So what amphetamines like Adderall do is above all, they increase the salience. What was boring now becomes prioritized and motivating.
It was right. So I was like, well, but one thing I noticed was, oh, that was a day I didn't have anxiety. I felt like it was removed. So I go to my therapist. I admit that
dopamine. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Good for you. Yeah.
I admit that I did this, and I said to my therapist, "What if I have ADHD?" I did not have ADHD, by the way. Just anxiety I treated with a drug for something else. I do think of that day so fondly. I got so much done. I also learned that salience is best in moderation. So many letters I get, and this is advice column stuff. So people primarily like entertainment and crowdsourcing, but people will say, oh, well, things are in this relationship. Will this person improve their behavior? Will I improve my lens in terms of accepting it? I think there's a lot of like, how happy am I supposed to be? Also this, am I doing something wrong while dating? And why isn't this working for me? But I'm always like sort of thinking like, well, if I get a letter from a 21-year-old that's like, will my terrible, long-term partner change? I'm like, I don't know, you're both 21, probably 100 times over. But when they're 41, I do feel differently where I'm like, you kind of get what you get. But like, it seems like I'm like, people want to know, is this good enough? Is this okay enough? Should I be satisfied with what I have? Is this me or the other person? And how do you navigate that if you're sort of accepting that a lot of changes?
Well, being satisfied or unsatisfied is another trait that we're not in control of. I guess with cognitive psychotherapies, you can nudge yourself one way or the other. But, I think it's important. I'm not telling people to feel that they have no control, that they're not agents, they shouldn't try to be happy. I mean, again, that's a recipe for despair and depression. I'm talking about the difference between what you try to do in your regular life, and then you hit a wall, right? Quitting smoking or getting out of a relationship, and then, if you get professional help, a good professional isn't going to say, try harder, right? They have to work with you to find a solution that is realistic given the situation.
Some change goes deeper than we can reach. And sometimes when our brain is stuck in one pattern, it can be very difficult to change on our own. But smaller things, simpler changes, are possible. This idea that even though at my age, let's say, there is less bandwidth for change, probably less.
You can still change.
Strive for change. But when I go to see I actually went to Chicago over the weekend for the first time, and I even just like being somewhere new, I was like, oh, I thought different things. I ate different things. Like fundamentally, I made no changes, but
you enriched your life.
I enriched my life, and it made me
feel better,
kind of nicer. I don't know, like I just feel like, so it seems like part of this is that if we can even just have the will to put ourselves in situations that might involve growth or test ourselves.
Well, but that's the trap of depression, right? Is that you don't, right? Depression tries to turn you into a lump instead of somebody who goes to Chicago and has an Italian beef sandwich or one of those.
And I did.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's why one goes now. Used to be deep dish pizza.
I did that too. Yeah. Positive change is possible in very simple ways. I tried a good pizza and sandwich, and I was reminded of new things and differences, and that the world is big. And I came home in a good mood, and I was better to people at work, and they were nicer to me because of it. It was change all over. Small changes, but important ones. Stephen Hyman says that sometimes change is that. We can do that, right? Some version of Chicago, or something that forces us to consider something different and positive. That seems like it could be in our control, right? Maybe listening to this season of the podcast will bring change through salience. Maybe my interview with Stephen Hyman is helping me change right now. He does want us to know that for those having trouble making the positive change they need, the kind that's out of their control, there are people working on developing the right help for everything from depression to addiction. There's so much work to be done, he says. I think that's what they're all doing in this neighborhood. Maybe it's why I like visiting.
That's why I'm a scientist. That's why we do science. We got to do better. We've got to do better.
So what do we take from all this? Well, I can tell you some things I learned that are important to me. Number one, our brains are more like silly putty in our 20s. I realize that our 20s are a great time to really focus on mental health, self-care, and positive change. And of course, I know this can be a really difficult time to do that because it's in our 20s that we're often building our lives, working our asses off maybe. I know that's a lot. That's another thing I take from this. Older people, when younger people tell you they're upset, listen and talk to them and have empathy. Their brains are plastic, and we all want it to stick right. Another thing, salience is big. New information can change us. I think this is how Kelly from episode 2 became Italian Kelly, a much happier version of herself than Australian Kelly, who was always dealing with discontent. She lives in a palazzo now, so my 40-something brain is going to focus on how to try new things and pull positive information from the experiences. And I'm going to focus on being nice to myself about the ways in which I will always be the same, which is okay, because most of myself isn't so bad. Now, Dr. Hyman is one expert who has thoughts about change, but we'll talk to more. Because as we hear more stories, I think we'll need more perspectives about what change really means. We'll hear a story that relates to all of this on our next episode. See you then. Love Letters is a production of the Boston Globe. Our producer is Christina Hanatu. Our executive producer is Kristen Nelson. Uzair Ahmed does our audio mixing and mastering. Sound design by Christina Hanatu. Maddie Mortel is our audience engagement manager. Special thanks to Nancy Barnes and Linda Henry. Our music is from APM. Remember, Love Letters is also an advice column. Send any question about dating, divorce, marriage, singlehood, friendship, whatever, to loveletters@boston.com. You can also follow us on iHeart and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. We love to know you're listening.
Be good to yourself, like yourself.
I mean, it's a tough thing sometimes. I'm Meredith Goldstein. Thanks for listening.